Hey, take two. It's now a few minutes after noon. It's Tuesday. We're here for a lunchtime chat with an amazing woman who I met at Camp Rusty a few years ago, which seems crazy that it was that long ago. We all just collectively lost some time together. And she also happens to live here in Rhode Island, which is awesome. Let's see. It let me request you, so hopefully it's going to work this time. Let's see.
Okay.
Ta-da! Yes!
Yay! Sorry for the technical difficulties.
Oh my God, it's totally fine. I'm always the one who has it, so I was like, it's not me this time. Yeah, a few weeks ago, I was trying to do one, and it wouldn't let me do anything. And I couldn't figure out what I needed, because it told me you needed to update, but it wouldn't tell me what I needed to do, but it was probably the same thing. So
yeah.
Here we are. I was just saying that we met at Camp Rusty, but was that 2 years ago now?
It was 2 years ago. That's insane.
Totally. And that you're also in Rhode Island, which is so fun because we're the tiniest little state. And I think, are you in South County?
I am actually north. So I'm I'm like in Warwick area. So yeah.
Okay. I was thinking about, it was me and you and Bethany. And there was one other person.
Oh my gosh.
Who's
I know, and I can see their face, and I cannot remember right now off the top of my brain. Oh my gosh.
What is her name? I'm totally blanking. But anyway, we were like, Rhode Island is this big, and we were like as spread out as you could be, which was kind of funny.
Yeah.
So I'm excuse me, so excited to talk to you today, and would love for you to just do a quick intro. And I love that you just reframed your Instagram. So I'm excited to hear your new revised intro about yourself.
Sure. So I'm Justine, and so I am a breast cancer survivor. I am currently in a yoga teacher training, and I'm finishing that at the end of May, so really soon actually. And part of my hope is to actually use some of that knowledge, because yoga for me as a whole practice was really restorative for me and healing for me after my breast cancer diagnosis and recovery and survival. So I want to kind of just share that with other women and help them in getting them to move their bodies in a way that's really restorative and kind and self-compassionate. Because I think a lot of times through my experience, at least, I had moments of not feeling compassionate and kind to myself. And I really just want to help other folks feel that, and especially through what is such a difficult and traumatic kind of experience in all these different ways that I know we'll talk a little bit about, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so wonderful. Learning how to reuse your body is so difficult. And, I talk to lots of women who haven't had the opportunity to go to physical therapy or have never done yoga before, or who just don't have a person who can kind of coach them through. And you're totally right. It's really frustrating to be in a body that used to move a certain way that now is different without having somebody. And I think it's awesome that you've actually been through the experience, because a lot of people who help me are like trained to help, but they actually don't know what it feels like to live in a body that feels really different.
Yeah. And it's a body that a lot of times, at least for me, felt like a stranger, right? And it was coming back to understanding that this is my body and what it looks like, and that I can feel safe in it and comfortable in it, and that it is home. It looks a little different now, and that's okay. And so I think it's just kind of helping others see that, and in a way that is, like you said, like understanding of the lived experience of that. So.
Yeah, for sure. I love you have such beautiful language for talking about things, which is sort of how we connected. And I think it must have been almost a month ago that I posted something on Instagram about wanting like a new pool of words. And my words all come from art history, so they're not particularly academic or medical. They're just whatever language I see people using and sort of have learned. But I feel like hungry for different and more words to use. And you reached out, and we had the best talk that I wish we had recorded, because it could have been something to share. You said so many insightful, awesome things. So do you want to talk a little bit about how you feel about the vernacular around breast cancer?
Yeah, I feel like it's one, as we talked about, there's so many different terms that get used, right? You have pre-vivor and survivor and thriver, and there's so many versions and iterations of that term, and they're meant to capture these different experiences women have or folks have that have been touched by breast cancer in some sort of way. But the problem is the terms themselves, one, we all have different perceptions of them. So that's like my social psychologist hat, right? We all have different perceptions of the terms based on not only like where we are in our experience. So are we newly diagnosed? Has it been, almost a decade, which for me, it's been almost a decade, which is insane to think about. Is it something that is, where you're at? Are you in active treatment? Are you not? Or are you someone who doesn't have treatment at all? Is it, a genetic mutation and a generational trauma of family history behind that? Like, we talked about with your experience. And so I think the words we use are so, I think, static almost, if that's a good way to put it, where they don't really get at the nuances of that journey and how they change. And also that we all have, again, like I know we had talked about in that earlier call that, early in my experience, I was very resistant to a lot of the terms of like survivor and warrior, or as another term that gets used. And because I was newly diagnosed, it was very hard to just hear those words. I didn't see myself as that.
Yeah.
And as time went on and I moved out of active treatment and into more NED or no evidence of disease, I felt I could use some of those terms, but that's because I was at a different stage. And so I think, I remember reading some of the comments in that thread, and other women resonated with that. They saw like that word doesn't encapsulate my experience. It doesn't explain how I feel, in my day-to-day with breast cancer, and how I explain my life with that. And
right.
so,
yeah, I think your point about it changing over time is so valid. Like how you think about yourself when you're in treatment or newly out of surgery or deciding to have surgery, and then how you think about yourself 1, 5, 10 years later changes. And there isn't any nuance or subtlety to the language. And, it's really only been, I think for me in the last 6 months that I've thought about my role as a caregiver and how that completely shaped my life. And when you said the phrase generational trauma, I was like, right, I don't think of myself as a pre-vivor. I think of myself as like a motherless woman. And that, like my whole thinking about myself and my parenting and my relationships, it's all about the moment of being the caregiver. It's not about my surgery necessarily, which of course like shaped me in many ways, but how my identity is built around this other like early formative experience, and pre-vivor just doesn't encapsulate it for me. So, as of this morning, we have like 25 responses.
That's awesome.
Which is cool. Yeah, totally. Because we've only done like a little bit of push on social media, actually, I think only on Instagram, but I posted it this morning on LinkedIn and asked a bunch of people if they would forward it or reply to it. And so it'll be interesting to hear. I think we'll reach a broader audience that way. The people who were responding that were the Instagram audience were really obviously in the Instagram target demographic age group. So it'll be great to get people who are on some other ends of that spectrum and see what we come up with.
Yeah. And I think, I think about the groups I'm connected with too. And I think, there's I agree with you. Like those different social media platforms are going to target different groups and how those nuances might look different. I think about when I first was, diagnosed, I was 23, and there was no one my age in the cancer center. There was no one, I was the youngest person I knew. And, luckily now I've had the opportunity to connect to younger women, but that took time. And so I think that'll be interesting to see too. So I think, we'll get more of a push and definitely more interest in people just thinking about those experiences and the nuances and the differences of those experiences.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you so much for helping design that survey. It is a thing that I don't have any expertise in, and you really made it so much better. I'm also hoping that people who see this, or some of the people I'm going to email with the link who are part of other support groups, either ones that used to meet in person or run support groups or virtual support groups, so we can get people who are really very different than the audience that we've connected through. I think, to your point, 10 years ago, I had my surgery in 2013, so it's also been almost 10 years. You couldn't find other young people to talk to, but it was also difficult to find people who were like a decade older than us too. So I think, we're connected in this new way. And hopefully we'll hear from a lot of people. And then I don't know what we're going to do with it. What would you do with survey data?
Well, I was thinking about this morning in anticipation of our call, and I was thinking like how, you said different like support groups, organizations, like how those things are currently targeting different groups of folks, right? Like pre-vivors, survivors, et cetera, that maybe there's better ways to connect and to build community that people can feel seen in their experiences and also feel more supported in those experiences. Because I think there's there's a lot of that happening, but maybe there's other ways that we haven't thought about based on the experiences that people share, that we can get a more nuanced understanding of that to better, kind of think about what are those supports, what's needed there.
Yeah, and I would love to figure out a way to share it. Like if we come back with some really helpful, insightful stuff, and some women really spent a lot of time responding, which I appreciate so much. Like, you helped make the survey, and I'm totally blanking on the words now, where it's like quantitative and qualitative. Is that what? Yeah. So there's like, multiple choice, yes or no, but there's also room for people to kind of expand on their experience. And some people did just a really beautiful job of that. And it would be great to sort of be able to shout from the rooftops about what we hear, because there's so many ways that during the experience and afterwards, it's triggering, right? Like when somebody just assigns you a word, if you don't feel like it belongs to you, it's so strange.
Yep. Yeah. And it's especially because you don't want anyone else to define what you're dealing with, what your experience, like it's yours. And again, what that looks like is so variable. And I think what will be so interesting, at least from like my psychologist brain, is to see the similarities of that experience, but then also to see where are those missing pockets almost, like where can we better help women in terms of like thinking about supporting them and giving them what they need and just connecting. I think we just, because I think there's a lot of ways I've been able to connect individuals, and I think there are still, women being diagnosed who are, they're jumping into this new world essentially of breast cancer, whatever you want to call it, that is, it's so big and there's so much to it now, which is beautiful, but then it's like, where do I fit into that story or into that landscape?
For sure. Yeah, as a psychologist, when you were going through the experience, were you thinking critically and like talking to your doctors and other people about like shortcomings you saw, or were you just sort of like, I don't know what's happening?
I think it was a mix of both, I'll be honest. I think it was a little bit of, I definitely was reading medical journals like a crazy person and being like, well, I read this finding in this journal. And they're like, you were reading journals? And I was like, yeah, that's what I do. And so they thought I was, they found that hysterical, but they also, I think I was able to have more meaningful conversations with a lot of my doctors because they realized I knew what I was, at least even if I wasn't a doctor in that sense, I knew what I was talking about in the larger sense of how it pertained to me. But at the same time, I had those freak out moments of, oh my gosh, what is happening? This is insane and overwhelming. And so I think, just like anyone else, I was human in those moments, but I think it was a mix. And I think for some, it's that more like clinical piece of it where you really get caught up in the nitty gritty. And then there's the more emotional piece of it where you have to process that. And so again, I think how you define yourself in those pieces too. And I think we've seen some really beautiful things of women in the community who have gone off and, share their knowledge from this more academic lens and who share it from this more kind of emotional lens. And so I think what I think will be interesting from this survey too is what do those pieces look like in terms of how do you define that experience, whether we'll see some of that, but it would be interesting to see.
Yeah, totally. It's really hard to be critical of an experience when you're in the middle of it. But I think to your point, so my mom was a medical research librarian, and she was really good at finding information, like when she was working for the doctors, right? Like looking those things up. And I think she got treated really differently because she showed up having done her homework and not like WebMD homework. And it's really difficult. You know, I know we weren't really going to talk about this, but advocating for yourself and knowing how to find the right information is so difficult. And I think, you know, you brought this up, that there's a lot of people who've been through this experience in the community who are getting easier to find, but it's still kind of difficult to figure out, like, where do I belong? Who's sharing information? You know, what is the information? What's actionable? What's real? What's researched? And so, you know, just to kind of reiterate what you said, it's not easy to figure that out, and hopefully it will continue to get better.
Yeah. And I think, you know, back to like everything that's, you know, what we're talking, the kind of basis of this conversation is knowledge is power, data is power. And to me, and the more information and, you know, piece we have of that will help us in kind of, you know, supporting other women and sharing that out. And I think even if that's sharing out on, you know, the Brilliantly page, and then maybe even giving some of that information in a like aggregate form to other organizations and such, you know, to think about like, how are you giving support to women who are coming to you in these spaces? And like in Rhode Island, that can mean other, you know, there's other organizations like that. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of space for that, and a lot of just listening too. Like, I think women just want to be heard about the pain that this experience can bring, and also just the journey of it. It's painful. It can be beautiful at times. It's a lot of things all at once, and that it's not something that is easily captured by one single word.
Yeah, of course. And I, you know, it is like there's a split where it's like people who get it and people who don't. And, you know, finding the people who get it is so beautiful. And whether that's about a cancer journey or a parenthood journey or a caregiver journey, like any part of the human experience, finding people who understand something about yours is so amazing and wonderful.
Exactly.
So regarding your transition to sharing your yoga practice on Instagram, like what's the best way to follow along? What are the plans that you have, and how can people kind of keep in touch and participate?
Yeah, so right now I'm mostly just sharing content related to my own yoga journey and breast cancer survivorship, and how I'm integrating those two and how I've been working to integrate those two. But my plan as I kind of work towards finishing my training is to like have offerings, and you know, some of those might be either like free offerings or at a low cost offerings to particularly breast cancer survivors, like meditation or other, you know, because I think about these moments of distress that we experience in this journey, whether you are someone who's gone through treatment or have a genetic mutation, but that this is just a stressful experience, and having those moments where you can find like calm and peace is so important. And so my hope is to kind of share some of that in a more tangible way, probably in the next couple of months, once I've kind of gotten through the rest of my actual semester and summer has opened up. But yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'm so excited to see how it goes and to continue overlapping and collaborating whenever we can.
For sure.
And this is the best account for you now, and you've been renamed, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I love it. Awesome. Well, let's be in touch about the survey results, and looking forward to talking to you soon.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks, Justine. Have an awesome day.
You too. Bye.